Was Oscar Piastri really in secret talks with Ferrari for 2026? Or has everything been a product of the clickbait that floods current F1? Stay, because today we are going to unmask this whole story and reveal the true drama that McLaren experienced after Abu Dhabi. On a psychological level, Piastri began to feel excluded from the team's strategic flow. The technical meetings were loaded into Norris' setup. The updates arrived first at the Britain's garage. Although McLaren denied any favoritism, the perception had set in. And in Formula One, perception is power. In just 5 races, the Australian went from having a lead of 34 points to being 24 behind his teammate. A 58-point turnaround that took him out of the title fight and placed him at the center of an emotional storm. To make matters worse, while the paddock debated his fall, unfounded rumors began to emerge about his supposed approach to Ferrari, which only served to further cloud his public image and undermine his morale. Piastri's rise was as meteoric as his fall was painful. From absolute dominator to third in the world. And the most frustrating thing wasn't losing, it was feeling like they didn't let him win. In the midst of the emotional and competitive debacle that Oscar Piastri was experiencing after the Monza GP, a parallel narrative began to emerge on social networks, YouTube channels, and even in some low-reputation digital media. The Australian driver would be in secret negotiations with Ferrari for 2026. The story had all the ingredients to go viral. A young talent disappointed with his team. A historic like Ferrari with a competitive car but without titles. The mythical figure of Mark Webber as a representative. And a pilot market that in 2025 began to agitate prematurely. But it was soon discovered that everything was smoke. There was not a single reliable source confirming even informal contact between Piastri and Ferrari. And when analyzed carefully, the rumor collapses due to its own lack of logic. Ferrari has no vacancies for 2026. The Italian team renewed Charles Leclerc with a multi-year contract that extends at least until 2027. And Lewis Hamilton, signed for 2025, signed a 2-year agreement with the option to extend for 1 more, depending on his performance and personal will. Added to this is Ferrari's internal context. With a competitive car and a stable duo, the team has no need or intention to shake up its structures. On the other hand, Piastri had sealed his commitment to McLaren before these rumors emerged. In March 2025, just days before the Australian GP, it was publicly announced that the Australian was renewing with the Woking team until the end of 2028. Not only was it an extension, it was a strategic maneuver to shield his talent from possible offers, especially with the change in technical regulations scheduled for 2026. McLaren wanted to ensure that their gem did not escape in an increasingly aggressive market. So where did the story come from? Everything points to a phenomenon that has become increasingly common in the era of algorithmic content: the fabrication of rumors to capture clicks. Several YouTube channels began circulating false versions of alleged meetings between Mark Webber and Ferrari executives. Some even talked about astronomical figures, contracts of $40 million per season, promises of priority status within Maranello, and even leaks that spoke of internal sabotage at McLaren to push Piastri out of the team. None of that stood up to the slightest analysis. There were no statements from drivers, managers, team directors, or credible journalists to support the narrative. The websites that published these articles were the same ones that weeks before had reported that Verstappen would go to Haas or that Red Bull would sign a retired driver. The most ironic thing is that while the headlines linked him with Ferrari, the Scuderia faced its own challenges. Hamilton and Leclerc were just beginning to get to know each other as teammates. The SF25 car had shown worrying ups and downs. And the technical team was more focused on stabilizing performance than on projecting long-term signings. Ferrari was simply not in a position to open the door to an internal war for seats. And yet, for several weeks, the rumor persisted. Each race without victory for Piastri fueled new evidence of his supposed discontent. Every team order to Norris was reinterpreted as a betrayal. A parallel reality was built where Piastri was the victim, Ferrari was the savior, and McLaren, the villain. Abu Dhabi, the last race of the season, was not a battle for the title. It was the inevitable outcome of a fracture that had been brewing for months. And in that symbolic closure, it became evident that Piastri had gone from being the leader of the team to becoming a secondary piece of a narrative built for another protagonist. The race itself was less dramatic than the conversations on the pit walls. Piastri arrived at the circuit knowing that only an unlikely combination of results could return him to the championship fight. I needed to win. He needed Norris to be in trouble. But what he got was a career plan that seemed designed to maintain the status quo. While Norris received a strategy based on undercut, aggressive, With softer tires at key moments, Piastri was instructed to keep track, wait, and maintain pace. He wasn't even allowed to run the alternative strategy he and his engineer had discussed during Friday's simulator. The frustration was not immediate but cumulative. Every decision made from the pit wall seemed to neutralize his ability to take risks. Halfway through the race, when it became clear that Norris had the pace to stay second behind Verstappen, Piastri's engineer asked him to conserve tires and not attempt the overtake, citing brake temperature and foreseeable degradation. It was the definitive message. The script was written and he was not the protagonist. From the outside, it might seem like a rational strategy. But for those who have followed McLaren's evolution closely in recent years, it was hard not to see a pattern. Lando Norris had been on the program for almost a decade. He was the visible face of the team. And although Piastri had demonstrated pure speed, technical precision, and a very high competitive ceiling, he still did not have the symbolic capital that Norris had built. The crudest thing is that there was not even an explicit act of betrayal. Only omissions, silences, tactical decisions disguised as neutrality. It was the kind of favoritism that doesn't need to be verbalized to be felt. In the post-race meetings, as revealed by an internal source cited by British analysts, Piastri was visibly upset. There were no screams. Only one dry phrase at the end of the debrief. "We didn't have the same career plan, did we?" The public reaction was ambiguous. Some defended the team's decisions. McLaren, they said, was only securing the Constructors' Championship, and to do that they needed to minimize risks. But others, including paddock figures such as Nico Rosberg and Jenson Button, pointed to a possible lack of internal fairness. When you have two drivers fighting for the title, you can't afford to prioritize one without consequences, Button declared on Sky Sports. What was most revealing, however, was not what was said, but what was not said. Andrea Stella, head of the team, avoided answering directly when asked if the strategies were the same. Norris, for his part, was elated about his first world title, but when he mentioned Piastri, his body language changed. There was no joint celebration. There was no hug on the podium. Just a pat on the shoulder, almost of commitment. And on that podium in Abu Dhabi, with Verstappen celebrating a symbolic victory and Norris his consecration, Oscar Piastri remained serious. It was not the gesture of a defeated driver, but that of someone who had understood the hardest lesson of modern F1. It is not enough to be the fastest. You also have to be the chosen one. And this is where the true tragedy of this drama is revealed. Oscar Piastri did not lose the championship due to lack of speed, nor due to my own mistakes. He lost it because the conditions under which he competed changed without prior notice. Because the rules of the game within McLaren were rewritten mid-season. Because the trust that existed between driver and team was broken. Not by an obvious betrayal, but by a succession of decisions that subtly pushed him away from the strategic center. For Oscar Piastri, this season could become a turning point. Not because of what he lost, but because of what he learned. Because after being a leader, obeying orders, maintaining composure, and still seeing the opportunity to be champion slip away, what follows is not resignation. It's reevaluation. And it is very likely that Piastri is already silently laying out his plan to regain control of his destiny. Leave it in the comments what you think of everything.